heard so far. Oh, we're missing Gilbert. I think we'll carry on anyway. Okay, so there are lots of definitions of project management, and indeed Gilbert shared some quite deterministic definitions, traditional sort of definition, this morning when he started talking about sustainable project management. The APM actually, I've got one of their little videos on YouTube, actually describes project management as getting things done. So I sort of depart from some of those traditional definitions, and starting with that view, that's where I sort of want to begin what I want to say. Now, I was on a writing retreat last week, and one of the bits of feedback I had about some of the things I've written was it was too abstract. I needed to make it more concrete. So what I then did was actually write 2 little vignettes. I want to tell you the story of 2 projects that I hope will illustrate some of what I want to talk about. So forgive me if I read, but these are 2 little stories. I say the Playground Project. For some while, the children and young people in St Leonard's have been asking their parents why their friends in the next village have a playground and they didn't. Councillor Jones, also a parent, asked for an item to be added to the agenda for a council meeting. Item 5.3, Children's Playground. Item 5.3 was duly discussed, a subcommittee set up, and the playground project began. A project manager was appointed, a bid for lottery funding written and submitted. The council went out to tender for a designer architect was appointed, a site was selected, plans were drawn up, there was a big local consultation process, decisions were made, the council went out to tender for a builder, the playground was built and installed on a surface made from recycled tyres, and finally handed over to the community at an official opening about 4 years after Councillor Jones's daughter had mentioned the subject to her mother. 10 months after the opening ceremony, a team from the council undertook a post-investment review. This is what they discovered. The project has cost £225,320, taken 3.5 years to complete. When first installed, parents loved bringing their under-2s to the playground. But since then, the playground flooded during the winter due to inadequate drainage to the south of the site. And in the evenings, pretty much all year round, except in the most awful weather, teenagers took up residence under the slide to smoke and use drugs. Okay, so that's one version of a very familiar linear project management process we've all encountered, and we've already had mentioned some of the projects to develop information systems that don't talk to other people or that aren't used by their users. So that's the very traditional process. Now picture this. Joe, a kid of about 12, was sitting on an old tyre at the back of his village and idly playing a computer game on his mobile phone. He was feeling bored, so he messaged 5 friends who were logged into the same computer game. They came round and joined him. They found some old rope and hung the old tyre from a tree. They then spent an hour or so before the sun went down, seeing who could swing the highest. The next day, they met a bit earlier and found a rusty frame. Another tyre became a landing target, and they tested each other's throwing skills. This went on for several days, and each day they added and tested more items to their playground. Then someone in the group suggested they build something for their younger sister to play on. And a few days later, the group had grown from 6 to 14 children and included some older and some younger children. Then one evening, an old gentleman gave them a bit of mirror, and a middle-aged physicist in the village, a lady, came and showed them how to make a telescope. So they carried on growing their little community. The children came without their parents, and the playground continues to be changed and adapted as new children join in with new ideas and others move on. So we have 2 playground projects. We've heard about the results of the first one. The second one, of course, is a project that's still going on. It doesn't have an end. So challenges perhaps some of the views we have of project management as being something with a defined end. Right. Okay, so projects as learning organisations. Oh, do we have the clicker still? Oh, never mind, it doesn't matter. Here we are. Okay, so the tale of 2 projects. I just wanted to contrast some of the key dimensions. So first of all, centrally, the purpose of those 2 projects was fundamentally different. I imagine Gwyn's going to be talking a lot about purpose later, perhaps. That's certainly an idea I've picked up from my engagement with the sustainability community. So the first one, the project was to install a playground. quite a clear, very objectivist type of purpose, focused on the deliverable. The second one was much more about social engagement. So we had, on one hand, we had sort of consumption versus the social engagement project. The process, the first one was very linear, a waterfall, typical waterfall where we have the different stages, one follows on from the other with knowledge flowing from each stage. In the second case, we had much more of an organic iterative process. Another key difference in the process was in the first one, we were very dependent on expert knowledge. We needed an expert architect, we needed an expert planner, we needed an expert builder to do it. In contrast, the second example used local knowledge, so they didn't build the playground where the site flooded. And there are examples actually of some of the coastal erosion projects that have been undertaken in recent years that have actually started by leveraging that local knowledge rather than bringing the experts in to solve the problem. And then I think I would characterise the style of leadership as being fundamentally different. In the first, we had that very conventional sort of command and control, monitor, process-driven approach in the first one, compared to much more of a convene and coordinate people, which characterised the second one. It was also the impact. In the first case, we were just really looking at the monetary components. We'd monetarised the value of the project. We might well have tried to put a financial cost on the cost of the drug use and things like that. We could go that far if we wanted to, which is a very conventional approach to tackling this from a sustainability angle. And the headlines, I think it was only last week, the big development at Swansea Harbour was rejected because it didn't represent value for money. How we actually put a price on some of the things that we might be sacrificing there, I don't know. The second one, the value was very much in terms of the value to the people, the human, and the environment, whether it was a neutral impact, it was certainly reusing what had already been used. The social and environmental dimensions may get looked at in the first case in, again, a very monetaristic measurement type way. But socially, the other thing the first one does, it reinforces that dependency on other people to do things for us, reinforces that dependency on experts to do things. Whereas in the second project, we were building the community. The kids were developing their skills. They were taking risks, but they were testing things. There was that. There was also that element of embracing different parts of the community. So it was bringing people together, building cohesion, rather than potentially causing divisions in the community. I mean, that second one, the first case, we were building a division between the young people, probably those that started lobbying for a playground when they were far too young to have any concept of drug use, into something that then became appropriated for their own purposes later on, because it was a safe-ish space for them, but it compromised other people's use of the area. And then you've got the environmental impact. And I know Professor Tim McIntyre-Batley started by talking about this building and having a very good low-carbon credentials. But is that good enough? I'm glad Tim isn't here to hear me say this, but actually just doing less harm to the environment, is that actually good enough? We keep on damaging it, but okay, we're making it, perhaps damaging it more slowly, but is that good enough when it comes to projects? Okay, so I think there is clearly a challenge out there for project managers to be doing far more than we have done. I think that challenge is starting to come through. Certainly already this morning we've heard that, and it was very good to hear both Gilbert Sylvius talking about that. The notes I've had from Andrew Edkins that he'll be joining us later electronically. He was talking about the frustration he felt, Peter Morris felt in drawing up that document he did. It was all about the frustration that project managers were well placed to start doing a lot more on this front, because we're used to bringing together people who don't all have the same view and facilitating those discussions. So why aren't we doing it in the sustainable space? Okay, just a couple of bits of theory I wanted to share with you. One of the problems I think we face in project management, and my apologies to those of you that have already heard me say this, Back in 1956, Kenneth Boulding defined 9 levels of complexity, ranging from static systems at level 1 through dynamic systems such as clockworks, control mechanisms at 3, animals, plants, a cell. Humans are classified at level 7. A social organisation, in other words, an organisation that involves more than one person, aka a project, is level 8. And there is only one more level of complexity, and that's the transcendental or the unknowable at level 9. Most of what we do, though, that technical view we take of project management, is built on an assumption that projects are no more complicated than level 3, a sort of control mechanism, a thermostat with inputs and outputs that can be clearly and easily measured. Much of the research on project management is in that space as well, using quantitative methods, rather than really recognising how complicated that human interaction in projects really is. We all are familiar with examples of projects that either didn't meet their initial requirements. I'm not sure what the latest figure is of the projects that are cancelled before they're even finished, because some of that tension between people is surfaced during the project. And we certainly heard mentioned this morning, Gilbert was mentioning the figures of the amount of economic activity that is represented by projects. My own argument would be it's probably far more than those figures. We had a figure of 35%. I mean, surely all the change that we see is a project, whether we call it a project or not, and perhaps that is part of the problem. Once we call something a project, it seems that carries with it a lot of baggage that seems to cause us a lot of problems. So that's my first challenge to you, or to us, is how do we start to recognise that complexity that is inherent in a project? The other problem we've touched on is projects are considered as in a linear way. The process is linear, whether it's a traditional sort of waterfall or, this is Mailer's 4D model, even Turner. Even once we start recognising this change and the action needed, we have this idea of a vision, do some stuff, and then we produce change, a linear process. Well, the screen's gone off, but never mind. Okay. In one of the documents that Nigel sent round before the event, you may well have seen these 2 diagrams that I think illustrates it very well. This was in the document about wicket problems and social complexity. When we first started doing project management back in the 40s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, put a man on the moon, the goal was very clear. And I know yesterday when some of the discussions that were taking place, I was sort of again posing this question, how did we get where we are now? And a lot of that, the answer to that seems to be because project management as we practice it today comes from engineering, that type of discipline where we can see things as a linear process. So this is a traditional waterfall type model. But when they studied the cognitive activity involved in solving complex problems, this is what the green line represents. It's a much less linear process. Okay, now the agile approaches, you might be itching to say, start to solve this problem. Do they? They certainly start to try and condense things so we have much shorter timescales. But the focus on delivery, I would argue, is even more strong. The focus on the product, whatever it is we're creating, is even stronger in agile. So yes, it solves some of the problems of a traditional, especially a long-winded linear process, but that focus on what it is we're producing, in the case of our examples, then if we start off by framing the project as we need to deliver a playground, we've missed the opportunities that Leslie Carter was talking about not just doing things right, but doing the right thing. So the way we conceptualise projects is quite problematic. So one of the things I've done is look at what we know about learning organisations. And there we have the idea of feedback loops starting to come in. So we've got this idea that information needs to come into the process in the middle while it is unfolding. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is we go out and define our requirements at the beginning, and then we batten down the hatches, draw the boundary around the project, and deliver what was specified at the beginning. Again, Agile is starting to tackle that to some extent by suggesting we work more closely with the people that require, with the users, the stakeholders, and so forth. The problem with that model is it assumes you have the right people in the room from the beginning. So if you define your team and define your stakeholders at the beginning, there's a risk that you actually may not, again, it's about are we doing the right thing here? Because those assumptions then don't get challenged as we go through. And you may not have necessarily identified all the stakeholders properly in the beginning. I noticed there was an interesting, where was it? It was either on, I think it might have been on Twitter. There was an interesting question being posed by the major knowledge community, I think, around should it be called stakeholder management, or there were various other permutations being discussed. And certainly I put forward the view maybe we should ditch that word management. Maybe it's more about developing those relationships rather than trying to manage and control them. So I put together those models and came up with the idea of projects as a learning organisation. And again, those that have seen a different version of this will see I've drawn it as a tree. The idea that a project needs to be represent the organic nature, rooted in its environment, but at the same time growing and adapting. So we can apply ideas of learning organisations to the project management process, in which case this then doesn't just become action, it's learning and action. And it's needs to be informed by collecting data from the environment and interpreting that data as we go through the project. Where that led me in my research was to the idea of 3 types of communication, or 3 zones, I called them. So there's what we traditionally think of, which is the participation in the project. There's communication needed to make that happen, which once we've defined our requirements and have got our cost target, our budget target, our time frame, we tend to just put that on rails and then go through that process. But also, if we take the ideas from the learning organisation, we also need communication that engages people, engages our stakeholders, both team members and the wider community. And that's not necessarily fixed. That might well vary as we go through. And then that gives us our third area, which is about connecting people to the project, the idea of the project. And in fact, they're shown overlapping there, but actually they're not really. They're really nested, because anybody who participates in the project clearly is also engaged and is connected. And so there's a nesting there. And just making the link to sort of what comes next, really, and sustainability, I think there's some parallels here with the idea sustainable development is traditionally shown as 3 pillars. That was the early conceptualisation of it, as 3 pillars, suggesting that trade-offs can be made. But come on, this isn't good enough, is it? Because none of us live on a different planet. We all live on the same planet. So I would argue, and so I'm going to hand over to Gwyn in a minute to pick up this thread. Again, the domains of sustainability are nested. There's no economy that isn't dependent upon and based within one or more societies. And all of those societies live on the same planet. So we're not separate. There aren't trade-offs that can be made between these things. There is dependency here that we need to be far better at recognising. And no, we're not focusing on process here in this session, in these 2 days. We're looking at competence specifically. But part of what I've started to do is start to look at sustainable projects. And in some cases, you might question whether they are projects in the sense that we usually think about them. But getting things done, and we are actually experimenting and starting to map onto a new process that isn't the 4 Ds or doesn't start with requirements, but is much more about an iterative listening and learning at the beginning, engaging stakeholders, measuring some baselines and reviewing, organising for some sort of intervention, and then this next steps bit covers everything that we would traditionally associate with project management, really, and it's about an iterative going around the cycle based on building up that local knowledge, the learning and sharing what stakeholders do, so convening and then coordinating actions that take place. But I don't want to dwell on that because, as I say, our subject today really is the competencies. But I put it to you really that to actually operate in this environment requires different competencies to the competencies that we currently associate with project managers. So I wanted to leave you with 3 thoughts really. Firstly, about the need to look beyond the boundary of the project. So this is picking up Rob's point about, is this project the right project to be doing? But also looking at the unintended consequences, and indeed perhaps intended consequences, but certainly looking at the unintended consequences on society, on all the people involved, whether they are nominated stakeholders or not, but also the impact on the environment. Again, there aren't trade-offs to be made. We're not saving the planet for the planet's sake, we're saving it for people. So there's a lot of dependencies there that we need to become much better at unpacking. We need to make space for creativity. We're not going to solve the problems we face now with the same thinking that created them. And that was probably from Einstein, and various other people have got various versions of that. But we need to, you can't train somebody to be creative, but we do need to create the opportunities, the headspace and the physical spaces for creativity. And this was just a shot when I was last up in London. There was an exhibition called, it was all about space, and they created various rooms that had different feel to them. And one was the doodle room, which I quite liked that image. And then everybody likes kittens, so I just wanted to share this with you. There's a really serious point. It's a bit of a pattern interrupt, so a nice kitten. But the serious point and the thought I want to leave you with is twofold, really. When we're communicating with people, that's what we're competing with. Okay, the videos of YouTube of puppies and kittens on YouTube. Anybody, especially once you start talking about communicating using social media, which again, we've had an introduction to the impact of the millennials coming through is having. Something else I gleaned from my writing retreat was that the go-to search mechanism for the under 25s, I think it is YouTube. I mean, most of us in the room probably go to Google, but I know I heard somebody talking about Googling. I went with Steve Knightley yesterday, wasn't it? He talked about Googling his ideas and different songs. We all are using Google now as probably our preferred first port of call when it comes to finding out stuff. But actually for the millennials, supposedly their go-to tool is YouTube. So that's what we're competing with. So you don't have long to grab people's attention and start to engage them in your project. And what was the other thought? The other connected thought is the idea around we only have so much headspace. Okay, so if we as project managers are worrying all the time about the cost, time and quality dimensions, it's not that we don't want to think about the environment and about the other things, but we don't have the headspace to do it all. So it is about starting to shift the priorities, and Rob again introduced the idea of organisational culture as important in that. So with those, hopefully, I think Win and I agreed we were here to provoke discussion, so I think that's my last. So yeah, my final slide, and I think Nigel's going to pick up on this later. The latest information about what the top 3 skills for business school graduates that I think are wanted by the employment committee, by businesses, is a curiosity and willingness to learn, inclusive and ability to work with different cultures, honest and ethical. So all these things that we're saying we need, I think we're pushing an open door where the younger generation is concerned. Okay, so I think it is an open door, and as project managers, we need to think about how we start rising to this challenge professionally. And I think with the APM still feeling their way towards what this charter status means, I think we have a very good opportunity to try and avoid the old sort of technicist approach becoming fossilised and being that's the way we do projects. So that's our challenge, I think, and that is what's part of the thinking behind this workshop. So did you want to add anything at this stage, Nigel, before I hand over to Gwyn?
No.
I know you're going to pick up on something.
It's our existing study.
Okay, so that's me. So let's stop that and hand over to Gwyn.
Questions first, Karen?
Sorry?
Do you want to take any questions?
Yes, by all means.
Okay, so I'm going to say something, and I was going to say it at the other presentation. Well, I tried not to, but now I'm going to go a bit out there and say. So maybe we'll answer the question. All this is great, and all this is wonderful, and I really agree with it. So get that first. But at the end of the day, as we say, we are project managers, and as I'm always saying to my team, we're here to do a job, and we get told this is what you will do, and that's what we get paid for doing. So if the organisation isn't particularly taught into the sustainable goals and for being responsible or whatever, how do we as project managers balance that? We might feel personally what we're doing is wrong, but if I turn around to my boss, who happens to be the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Tim Abdulbati, and says, well, thanks for that, Jonathan, but actually, it goes against my moral principles. I don't think that's a responsible thing to do. he's not gonna say, okay, Jackie, thanks for that. He's gonna say, well, thanks very much, but there's the next person in line who will do it, and I'll pay them for doing it. So I think there's something there at the moment that we can't balance. You know, we've got what we want to do and we know is right to do against, we've all got to pay the mortgage at the end of the day. It's kind of a statement, not a question. Yeah, absolutely.
That's because I have heard it over the years a couple of times. And of course, there's a reality.
That's what I was searching for.
However, I do feel, I mean, there is I understand that we all need to pay the mortgage, but there is a bottom line on what let's say, what confirms with our personal values. So on one moment, you might be asked, say, okay, can we build a factory for kids, for child labor? There will be, I hope for many people, there will be a level that you say, well, I'm not going to do that because that's not according to my personal ethics or values. I think what we are discussing a little bit, so there's the organization, there is your personal values, and there's room in between. And I think there are a couple of things. One is APM, we are now a chartered profession here. Is there a professional set of values? Is there also something that the profession says, well, this is our bottom line, and dear society, if you are organizations or sponsors or owners or whoever, if you go beyond that, try to find a project manager to do that. That would be very strong if we could do that. You see that in the medical profession, you see in the legal profession. I think we are far away from that, but it could be something, and it would be strong. It sounds a little bit ugly, but if the profession would say, well, actually, if you do this, you lose your license to be a project manager. Well, you don't have a license to be a project manager, but you lose something. So there comes a professional value into place. But I would say that's a negative motivation there. There's a much more positive side to that, and that is, okay, your boss said something, or sure, but I see, and I was the presentation of the guy from Ireland who was talking about the public sector. I actually see the private sector pulling this, not the public sector, not these infrastructure projects. If you look at the SDGs, who is translating the strategy in SDGs? It's companies like Unilever, Nike, and of course they're not all good. I agree with that, but they are moving ahead in translating this. So actually, and of course those organizations, there's still the difference between the strategy and our client. Let's also relate, but I mean also saw here, that's the strategy, that's the university translating also its strategy into the SDGs. So that alignment is not completely there yet, but I would say if we as project managers can show our project sponsors that, hey, you're working in an organization and this is your strategy. So if I now can show you that actually in my project, the one that you asked me to do, that we can change something that gives the project more value in your organization where you are working, you must be really crazy not to do that. So that's also that alignment issue that we have to face, sure. But let's say the positive thing would be that you show that it gets more value. And yeah, that's somewhere so in the reality, I think we have all these things. We have the negative things, we have the values things, the personal things, the professional things, and we have the strategy and the organizational things.
So I like to link to the values. I think that's good. I think personally, also I was thinking, I can't remember which person it was, but they're talking about how some companies move away, for example, from Donald Trump because they don't want to be seen to be associated with what he's saying. And I think the millennials and Generation X have a real key to play here because it's, so I'm turning it on the head now, but it's basically if they don't want to be associated with people that are doing the wrong things, it will come from them. So I think that's really quite important. But I just think it's something we need to bear in mind when we're going through these things.
No, absolutely. It is.
Brilliant. I mean, it's all up here, but at the end of the day,
It is the challenge. I
I
think I almost my sense is that the momentum is always growing.
People like Max and Corey.
Yeah, but also things like Blue Planet. Blue
Yes,
Planet was put into the popular mythology. So I think organisations are finding it harder and harder to say no. I think a lot of it is organisations, because it's very easy to hide behind the notion of organisations. At the end of the day, it is individuals making individual decisions all the way down the line. And going way, way back, far too many years when I was a purchasing project manager, even then I thought my project was actually about a series of one-to-one conversations I have. Okay, we only turn a blind eye when we think the organisation is something that we don't connect to. So I think that whole idea of connection is growing. Because I think we're at a crossroads. We can either let project management become fossilised as a purely technical discipline, or we can start rising to the challenge. So thank you for that. I think Darren might have a question.
Yeah. By the way, there's quite a lot about values after lunch.
Oh,
yes.
Touching on that. In terms of your starting point, the two vignettes, the two stories, I think it's quite a powerful comparison. You've probably not done enough on what it means. Having played with the one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is restructure the body of knowledge for the next edition, the 7th edition. And part of the struggle with that is the definitions that we have already. And you have strayed from the acceptable traditional definition, and you've got projects in a new way.
Yeah.
And those new projects, the things that emerge, the things that come up bottom up, and where the community decides and the community does all sorts of interesting things, is a real challenge. It is way above the 35% of projects that happen officially as projects, but it is a very interesting arena, and then there's a lot of power. It's a very powerful idea of looking at those emerging actions rather than projects, and I think that there's a lot. Projects have a lot to answer for, or the way we've interpreted them, and I'll touch on that as well. But part of it is, you mentioned the kind of the waterfall engineering perspective, and that's part of the problem as well. It wasn't like that to begin with. A lot of the projects that we did in the 50s and 60s were creative, they were looking for answers, they had no ideas, the process didn't work as a waterfall type of process. It was exploring things, and we've forgotten how to do that.
Yes, it's even more ironic, isn't it, as to where we are now and where it's seen now. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know you had a hand in the current reshaping the body of knowledge, so I'm even more delighted to find it. But also, I was aware, as I was writing those vignettes, and only this last week, I suddenly realised that I've got a much bigger table that starts to compare. Absolutely, I think it was so helpful to get that feedback. I need to make my abstract ideas concrete. I imagine it's going to be a teaching tool for me for years to come. But in terms of challenging, I'd rather, as a researcher, just put my pure research hat on, spend time trying to learn from projects that are successful, even if they're not called projects, because there are lots of them out there. It's when we start calling it a project, and it's that 35% or whatever that fail. We spend massive resources up trying to analyse and look at why they fail. I've always said I'm not interested in teaching my students how to run projects that fail. I want us to understand how it really works so they can run projects more successfully. So I think Gwen's now itching to get going.
You
So
can
I'm going
set
to
up
sit
my
down.
slide. Sorry, what was your name?
Jackie.
Jackie. That was a stunning question, because I suspect that almost everyone has that lurking in their mind.
My team over here.
I'll respond by telling you how I faced that dilemma.
Yeah.
The second time. The first time was a bit more suicidal. The second.
Do you want this to present?
But I mean, even
Just a bit of-
said
sorry?
that, didn't he? Tim said that in his presentation. He said, we go for buildings that are good or excellent, not
Not on standard.
fantastic,
Yeah.
but the next level down, because if we go for the top level, it costs another £20,000, you know, so
That's just
it's always
mine.
that play off.
That's just mine. But I want to focus in on the question that you, as Jackie, asked about how it affects you. Because a bit about my background. At the moment, I am one of the leaders of the Association of Sustainability Practitioners. And it's important to stress practitioners, it's not professionals. For those people who are professionals, I've found they're very rarely practitioners. They're paid to do sustainable jobs, but they don't live it at home, they don't live it with their families. So we focus on other people that may be professionals, but actually they're trying to practice how to live sustainably in a world that is currently designed to be exactly the opposite, and mostly designed by happenstance. It's not a big conspiracy that let's fix the planet. It's, oh shit, we just fixed the planet. That's right. So it's accident. I helped set up the Global Association of Corporate Sustainability Officers. It must be a branding person's nightmare. I can't call it GACS. But it was run by people, set up by Alan Knight, Francis Sullivan, the heads of the global and corporate sustainability people, mostly in the UK, about 400 of them. And that was really interesting. And that went for professionalisation, standardisation, etc. And I spent a long time, my actual professional career was 30 years with what's now Logica CMG and EMC, setting up and running consulting organisations, which are predominantly project-based, from a person for 6 weeks to 150 people, fixed price, to create for the first time ever a mathematical model to simulate the Dutch gas with Hatsuni. And we did it the first time, which is interesting because no one had ever done it in the world. So I've come from a very traditional project management background, and it was deeply dissatisfying, which is why I left it. ASP focuses much more on those sort of questions. We support, challenge and connect people who are trying to learn how to become more sustainable. And we get involved in lots of deep processes. And a meeting between 4 of us in Somerset House about 18 months ago, I just came to the conclusion that I could never work again for anybody or any project or any company that put profit before people. And when you say that out loud in front of 3 people, I feel I am my word. It simplified my life dramatically, because as a freelance consultant, I could eliminate 99.9% of my marketing database. And I realised the only ones I could sensibly work for were B Corps. Because B Corps are committed in their charter and purpose to create benefit for the environment and benefit for society and make a profit. And that's the first legal structure I've seen that combines those things. Normally it's a fight. You do good or you make money. You make profit and you trash the planet. B Corps, no. Good people do good things and make good money. That's the ethos. And that's, I think, really phenomenal step forward. It's embraced now in most legal systems around the world, or being embraced in it. So it breaks our model. But that was quite a significant moment. And funnily enough, 9 months later, I just worked down the road. I ended up working for the only B Corp endorsed at the time, Folk. And they happened to be 600 metres from my front door. So, I don't know what you want to read into that, but if I hadn't made that declaration, I would have never actually ended up working with it. And I think we all come to a point, as you say, where, sorry guys, enough is enough. I will not cross that line again. And it's hard, because I've still got a mortgage. I've still got to eat. I've still got to get my clothes. So, you're in good company. So that's a bit about my background. I'm going to bring on loads of the things that Gilbert talked about. I'm really sorry I missed the first few minutes of talk. And Rob's stuff, I worked with his predecessor, Peter Head. And Peter Head's view of why he's going to really do good is that he's got access to $50 billion worth of traditional investment funds in China who are saying one thing: they will never invest in any project that cannot show the positive environmental and the positive societal impact of their project, because all the other projects fail financially very quickly. Those that do those first two generally make a lot less money, but for a lot longer, and they get all the other buy-in. And this is not people trying to do good, this is people trying to maximise the return on investment. So this is that B Corp structure. That group of financiers are saying, if we don't, in quotes, save the planet and have stronger communities, our projects will fail. We will make less money. So not only is it a personal issue, but a lot of institutions are rapidly moving onto this line of, hey, it all aligns. If we all start looking at all the stakeholder values and benefits, we'll all succeed. All got more chance of succeeding. Very topical. Well, my first thought was responsible project management. My first thought was, to whom are we responsible? And for what are we responsible? And by the way, I always speak with a lot of passion. It's because I believe a lot of stuff. It does not mean I'm right. And when I am right, it doesn't mean that you aren't right as well. But I do believe in multiple truths simultaneously applying. So this is a very personal thing. I don't know what she was trying to do. I still don't know what her husband was trying to do either. But I think that's one of the best things the Trump family has done for a long time, because it made us all ask, do I care? Do I really care? So I want you to do a couple of things for me now. Just write down 5 things that you care about. And if there's parents here, there are grandparents, you're all sons and daughters. So it can be anything you like. Just very quickly, 30 seconds, 5 things you care about. Feel free to discuss it on your tables. Okay, I'd really like to be quick. I don't want it to be an intellectual process. It's much more essential. What do you feel? And then, maybe with a different colour implement, I want you to put an asterisk by those things that you've written down that you actually care for. In the literal sense of the word, you're actively engaged in doing something that cares for that entity. Is anyone feeling slightly embarrassed by what they're seeing in front of them? Or inspired? Are there significant differences between other things that aren't asterisk? Because most of us care about a lot more things than we care for, because life is short and it's busy. I found out there's a bit of a surprise that I cared a lot for my mother, because she's in a home at the moment with dementia, and I was going to every week and I was caring for her. But I realised I didn't actually care about her. I've got no emotional context with my mother. But in 3 years now caring for her, just an hour a week, I start to realise I care about her. And now my relationship with her has radically changed. Because it's not just the hour I'm with her, it's the other 7 days times 24 hours when I'm thinking about her welfare, where's she going in her life, what's the next step for her. And I'd employ emotions a lot because it led me to this question: how do we nurture these things? So if you've written down the planet that you care about, or biodiversity, or youth, or whatever, how do you nurture this? How do your projects nurture this? It goes back to what you're saying here about there are things you do care about and you're not actually going to be prepared to go over that line where you actually start harming them. You may do it inadvertently, but as project managers, we are first and foremost who you just identified you are. You are people who care. And if you're designing a project, then you've got a fantastic opportunity to design that project to nurture the things you care about. And your project could be your life. Literally, your life. So how are you going to design your life to nurture the very things you care about? It's very easy as a 63-year-old, soon-to-be-dead boomer, who've made all the mistakes, right, that you made, to suddenly come across this realisation that that's what life is, to me, is really all about. It's very difficult for a 16-year-old to do that. They're wired, we haven't had the experience. So when I asked Rob the question, and he said, we're going to talk about wisdom, I got. Because I've made loads of mistakes, I've learned that if I'd started my life by understanding what I'd nurtured, what I cared about and designed my life about nurturing it, I'd be a lot happier for a lot longer than I have been. And there's not much else to life but being happy. So what's this got to do with project management? I think everything. I don't think there's anything about this that's not relevant for a project manager who is a human being. So, I'd like to reuse, not that Karen and I spend a lot of time talking with each other, but we do. And I'm not sure whose ideas are who, doesn't matter, we come up with good ones. This is where your project sits, no matter what it is. I don't know how I did that, but I'll go back, touch screen. So, when you're designing a project, I'd like to see, there's a project in there, and that's the economy, society, I'll call it the Earth, or let's call it the world. First of all, if it's going to be successful, it's a good idea to work out what you need from these things. So what does your company need from the economy? What does it need from society? What does it need from the environment? Give you a clue. Society. What does a project need from society? Skills, educated people, roads for people to get to work on. What does it need for the environment? Fundamentally, it gets down to clean air, clean water, and arable soil. There may be more. Biodiversity. If your project is destroying those or consuming those things at a rate faster than the Earth can regenerate them, your project is, by design, unsustainable. It will die, along with a lot of other things. But it doesn't need to, because we can apply a bit of intelligence, a bit of experience, and we can start to work out the answers to questions like, what benefits do we provide? And I'll give you a very trivial example. I'm a beer drinker, and my beer normally resides in my fridge. I don't put it there. My wife does. So if I'm drinking my beer faster than she's put it in there, I have an unsustainable beer habit. So I make sure that I have a negotiation with my wife that she puts beer in at least as quickly as I take it out. And to do that, I have to provide her with certain benefits. But so I care about my beer. I realise I'm a consumer, and I want to be a long-term consumer. So I've got to get the system in balance, and I've got to nurture my supplier. I've got to look after my supplier. So my wife becomes, as many other things, she becomes my supply chain for my beer. So we can start thinking about this. What do we give back to society as a company, as a business? And we've seen a really good example where indignation started changing. One of the most important things a company can do is pay bloody taxes. Because that pays for the universities, it pays for the hospitals, it pays for the roads. If companies are wantonly avoiding their tax, they are unsustainable. Our societies will be unsustainable. And I don't care whether you call that right or wrong, or ethical or unethical, it's unsustainable. I try to live in a world where there's no right and wrong, and no good or bad. I think, does it help me achieve my goal? If I want to live in a sustainable planet, I want companies to pay taxes, and I want to pay tax. Because it leads to a better future. So, projects have got to start understanding the benefits and what you can do. Well, I'll come back to that in a second. This is looking at the impact. And as Karen said already, and I think Upbury said, reducing negative impact is simply not on. Doing no harm is not good enough. Almost every company out there today says, we're going to be less, we're working to be more sustainable. No, they're not. Because they were designed to be unsustainable. And they are not thinking about reducing benefits. They're talking about things like reducing the impact on the planet. Well, actually, what does that mean? What it really means is they haven't thought about what they're doing, because they're assuming that all their impacts are negative. So they've got to, yes, reduce the negative impact, but if you're having a positive impact on it, why on earth would you want to reduce that? So let's split this PR crap out and say, we're going to reduce the negative impacts, and we're going to increase the positive impacts. And by the way, we're going to list the positive impacts, and we're going to be responsible for delivering those. And if you need a plan to do all that, let's call it a project plan. Let's assign a project manager with the responsibility of specifically increasing the positives so they outweigh the negatives. And that's why I say, most companies, their sustainability team is not in the boardroom. It may not even be in the headquarters. It's normally squirreled away in some place where it's optional, ignorable and fireable. You asked the head of sustainability of Barclays and HSBC, were they sitting around the table when they invented PIP? Were they sitting around the table when they invested in food commodities where they had no rights to, making huge profits, which put up the basic prices of the commodities? So people can't live on $1 a day now, they can have $2 a day, because people at the banks were exploiting that. And the sustainability officers were never round the table. They don't have a say in how the company runs. So being unsustainable, if every company succeeds at being less unsustainable, we'll just have a world where all companies are still unsustainable, and therefore our life is. It's simply not good enough. But it's common practice. How do we create benefits? We need to start creating business models that regenerate, that are generative. We need to start creating environmental capital. It's easy to create social capital. We've done it today. We've got a lot more people together sharing ideas. It's easy to do financial capital. The environmental one is the difficult one. Unless you are a paper maker who plants 3 trees for every tree you cut down, at a rate that the trees are growing quicker than you're depleting the forests. So it's not necessarily that complicated, it's just that we're not used to thinking about it. And as someone said before, the people that design the projects have not given the project managers the right objectives because they're not embracing that. So these are the questions that I don't have the answers to. But if you're going to train project managers, if you're going to, let's start looking at some of these questions, because WSP had this 5 years ago. WSP is similar to Arup, and their thing was, we create this slogan was, we create regenerative business models for our clients. Clients didn't know what they were talking about, but they did. And it changed the way that project managers work, because they were looking at how do we create capital, not consume them. And it's a different mindset. Those of us who remember Elton John, on his very first album, there's a song, and the words go, everything about this place was born to live and die. And there are 3 really lovely words there. Birth, life, death. And we've got this, I don't know this touch screen. You had this model up before. I once spoke to Satish Kumar and I said, why am I struggling with this? When you haven't read the texts that were written 10,000 years ago. Go back and do your bloody homework before you start bitching on about things wrong, because we all know that's the actual life cycle of a project, of everything we create. Death is as much to be admired and loved as life. It is a fixed element. There's nothing we can do to escape it. If you do not do this, if you do not plan your project so that it will die successfully, and its products will die successfully, or we might call them recycle, reuse, etc. It's going to fail. It's going to fail us. And that, you could say, is Buddhism in a can. That was there 2,500 years ago. We lost sight of it somewhere along the line. So that's a picture of samsara, life, death, rebirth. That's the cycle we as human beings, whatever your belief, some think we are locked into that cycle. And so are our projects. I'll just give you 2 examples here. RNLI. Does anyone know what the purpose of RNLI is? Perfect. It's slightly modified in that to save life in rivers as well. But that's it. They save life. Are they ever going to complete that purpose? Sadly, no. And if you're a sailor, there's nothing more you want to see than that big orange boat coming out when you need it. They've got an eternal purpose. London 2012, are they still around? They put on the Olympics. That was a project that was born to live and die. End of the Olympics, take a lot, go home. Hopefully leave the legacy, which they didn't really. But one of the things they designed in there, and this is ironic, RNL lifeboats are pretty much bulletproof. You can't sink them. You can't scrap them. You can't recycle them. They're not designed that way. So a company with an eternal purpose has locked all its products because it goes for the short term into a completely unsustainable model. The best I heard from RNLI is that people now using former RNL lifeboats to make hotels. Cool. Spend nights in an RNL lifeboat. I want to know where that hotel is. But they can't dismantle them. All those resources are locked forever into this indestructible hull. Whereas London 2012, one of their goal was to be the greenest look at Thames ever. And a friend of mine worked on the part that was looking at landfill. Landfill had to be zero, not just for them, but all their subcontractors. No one had ever done that before, but they do know how to do it now because they did it, because the project manager got the right brief. And that inspired lots of people, supply chain managers, to then start pushing that down the supply chain. It meant all the standards had to be rewritten, what were recommendations were adopted as requirements. So it pushed the whole building industry a lot further forward. So, you know, purpose is really important, but it can have contradictory or apparently contradictory outcomes. I'm sure there's not a person here that doesn't know the circular economy. That's what we used to do, take, make, throw away, and as Ellen MacArthur found out, there is no away. This is what we're just seeing now with Blue Planet. There is no away. The plastic we put in the ocean today is equivalent to the plastic production of 20 years ago. If we carry on like this, the plastic we're producing today will be in the ocean in 20 years' time. Has anyone seen Plastic Ocean? That's depressing because they show lots of solutions. And what it is, it's companies that are being designed to extract all the plastic from the ocean. But those companies are shareholder-driven companies. Their purpose is to exist and create shareholder value. They require plastic to be in the ocean in order to meet their goals. Any company that's built on that will not try and solve the problem. They want to perpetuate the problem. So that's a deeply depressing film until David got hold of it, and with his charisma, reach, etc., suddenly people got it. It's not about taking the plastic off the beaches. It's about stopping it getting there in the first place. So it's got to go right back. And this, as we know, is being adopted now by many manufacturing companies. In Holland, Rabo, etc., the investment banks there are no longer even opening business proposals that are not circular business models. Simply, they don't have to. There are so many Dutch companies now that have got this, and they're circular buildings, not physically, buildings that can be picked up or dismantled, picked up and moved to another town where there's need for them. Literally reusable office blocks like this. And the banks are saying, we don't need to trash the planet, we don't need to invest in things that aren't circular anymore, because there are so many people that get it these days. I'm deeply optimistic about the future. So, but this is a radical departure from the old model. What's this got to do with sustainability? I think, well, that's where we came in for. Let's start thinking, what are we trying to sustain? Any suggestions?
Future, manual.
No? Anything else?
Ourselves.
Sorry?
Ourselves.
Yeah, it's really selfish. Why not? Because we're not trying to save the planet. If we want to save the planet, the best thing we could do is get off it. We are the biggest single threat this planet's ever had. And a lot of species would be a lot happier if we got off it. It's not the planet. The planet's doing fine. It will always look after itself long after we've gone. The only thing I know in nature that's sustainable, because we're not, nothing is nature. You're my friend.
I'm not understood exactly a philosophical debate. Is it about maintaining us, or is it about maintaining the planet?
Well, I don't know the answer.
Well, the last thing is a little bit tricky. Once the robots take over,
Yeah.
because they may decide that we're the bad guys, and if they take us off the planet, everything's okay.
But the robots are evolving from us, so maybe that is nature. Maybe everything we build is natural, because we're nature.
Let's put an end to.
Absolutely, I'm with you there. So, throwback. Yeah, we mentioned my birth year. I was born in 1954, so I was one of these. Never learn, do we? I was born when the world had 2.5 million people. I was born in the same banking system that we've got today, the same education system we've got today. I was born in the same medical system we've got today, the same political system we've got today, that was not fit for purpose then, and they're not fit for purpose now, because we've got some in the region of 7.5 billion people on the planet, and the systems weren't really designed for 50s, they were designed in the 1850s by people who, some of them thought, we have probably thought all there is to think about science. There is no more. So we've got a fundamental problem that it's not how we live, because we're going to go off this planet in the next 30 to 40 years, most of us. What about 2050 when there's 10 billion? And look at this. This is the rate at which the population is growing. The rate of, in other words, this is predicted to be the peak population of the planet. I don't know what happens after that. Maybe it suddenly goes crazy again. So I think that's the sustainability challenge. It's not how we're going to live. It's how the next 3 billion that come on this planet are going to live. And it's got to be inspirational. They've got to live in peace. They've got to live equitably. They've got to have equal opportunity. They've got to have access to education, food, and all the other things, and good employment. And we've got 30 years to figure it out. 30 years. Will HS2 be built in 30 years? Will the London's airport be built in 30 years? We've got to come up with something pretty radical with our banks, our educations, our political systems, or game over for the next generation. I've got 2 kids. I know what they want me to be doing every day, and I know what they hope I'm doing every day, and that's why I'm here. And I've got to pay the rent. So it's got to be realistic. I gleaned this from a member at GAXO when we were talking about this. That, I think, is the most powerful phrase I've ever come across. Whatever the outcome is, it's got to mean it's going to be enough for everyone forever. We don't consume all the oil now. We don't consume all the rare metals for the electric batteries. We need to start thinking about how can everyone have access to everything forever and live sustainably. There are some people who are leading the field. I don't know if you've ever heard of River Simple. But look at this. This company produces hydrogen cell cars in the middle of Wales in a town of 4,000 population. This guy decided his purpose is not to produce cars. His purpose is to systematically, very important word, which you guys understand, elimination of the environmental impact on personal transport. He hasn't put negative because there is no positive impact of transport at the moment. It's all negative, so let's eliminate that. Everything we do, the design of the car, the structure of the business, the people we work with, is in pursuit of this goal. This is not a car manufacturer. This is a sustainable business that's trying to learn how to be sustainable and share that. All the patents of those cars are open source. They're free for anyone to go and build the same car in the next town, because that's the way you get things ubiquitous, you give them away. And this is his phrase, less sustainable is still not unsustainable. So he created one thing. This is a governance structure that's radically different from anything you see out there today. The top are limited companies with one person in that vote, and they all have equal vote, right? So you see, the investors have an equal vote to the earth. It's interesting, isn't it? An investor, your financial investor, can be outvoted by the earth. They didn't have to do that. They do now, because they've been working 15 years in this model. And they create and define benefit streams to each of these entities, the stakeholders, and the board's responsibility is to deliver those benefits to each of the stakeholders without preference. And the argument to the investors is, we will deliver you more value if we satisfy the other 5 than if we don't satisfy the other 5. I don't know of any company that's ever tried that or succeeded. And they're not there yet, but they've spent 15 years and they're getting there. So have a word with Hugo, find out how he does it. Help him, he needs help. because no one knows how to live sustainably. No one's ever run that business model before. But it's there out there, and it's there to be used and copied. So final thoughts. I don't think anyone knows the answer to being sustainable, and anyone that does probably hasn't understood the question. Because we've never had to do it. We've never had to think about how we're going to live 10 billion people on this planet and share everything equally. So, but what's very true is that we need to create, develop, deploy, which is that model, fundamentally new systems, not incrementally new systems, fundamentally new systems, and thinking about how we create the future. I'm use the same quote as you, is that, this system we've got has got problems inherent in it, which this system cannot solve. We need to go to a different level of thinking. We need to introduce different ideas. We need to have creativity. Children don't need to be taught creativity. They can't. They are 100% creativity when they're born. We educate it out of them. If we want to get kids creative, leave them alone. There are simple ways of doing this. But we need to get that inspiration and creativity from somewhere. And my final thought, I came back from one of my deep session meetings, and I run the Association of Sustainability Practitioners, and I came back and suddenly realised I'll leave the word, I have no idea what sustainability is anymore. As Gilbert was saying earlier, people have used and abused the term, it's lost its meaning, people are just not to understand, they've got different levels of understanding. And a very inspired friend of mine just said, it's not career, it's not a set of actions, it's quality of the outcome of conscious thinking. So samsara is not up there per accident, I like the picture. I think we really need to connect with different things, with ancient wisdom, with spirituality, because we've got to harness the wisdom of the previous generations to solve this problem. We can't exclude anything. But in my own experience and ASP's experience, the deeper we go into conscious thinking, the better the outcome. And the better the outcome, meaning it's satisfying broader stakeholder groups. 7 generations into the future is the model we use. Are we going to harm 7 generations? Native American Indians have been using that model for 2,000 years. Our companies, 3 months, next quarter, the next year. Prime Minister, the next 4 years. So I'll leave it there. I could go on for many, many more hours.
Well, we thank God.
Take any questions or suggestions?
Exactly, I know when you need to leave us, don't you?
About 1:15.
Oh, right, I wanted to have it at 12:30.
I set that as a limit just in case.
Well, want to take questions then?
Please, yeah.
Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very, very inspirational. Could we move it one sheet back? Sorry, we moved to that. Because I was. Could you left? Yeah. Perhaps that last line, Jackie, right?
Yeah.
You were asking, okay, but how about my reality? I've seen, I don't know whether it's the answer, but I think, well, if you think about that last line, that may be part of the answer there. And for example, the governance model you showed, which is actually one sheet before this one, it would be interesting to think about project management in a governance model like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we think we all know, we have project executive and we have senior user, senior whatever, Prince 2 describes, but think about a project governance structure, applying a model like this. And rewriting, I mean, if we need to give some content to responsible project management, rewriting the system of project management.
Yeah. I remember the first time Gwyn shared that with me, and I thought, well, why don't we just do that with projects?
Well, believe me, that's a project.
Yeah.
That guy has just put it in a company. It's a project. He wants to get.
No, I agree, but I mean, I can open any book on project management, and I probably won't see this model. So if you think about what would responsible project management mean, also sitting in a certain reality, it would probably mean also a little bit rewriting the rules. and
Well,
step a little bit outside of the reality. I
And I
guess.
don't think it's that difficult for any project manager to understand that, because you're saying, okay, who are my stakeholders?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the earth, users, community, staff, investors, commercial partners. Yeah, I've got to satisfy all those. How do I satisfy them?
Yeah.
What do they want from me? They have a really interesting way of doing their job descriptions, by the way. When a person joins a team, it's only a 20-man company, 20-person company, get a blank sheet of paper, and I go around and see everyone and just ask them 2 questions. What do you want from me in order to do your job properly? And I go around and collect that. And then I ask around and say, and what can you give me so I can do my job properly? That's my job description. It's not written by management, it's written by the society. That would be, I think, very fitting in your second playground model. They don't need a manager, they just need to communicate. Keep asking, how can I serve you? Oh, by the way, I'm incomplete as well, so I need something from you today. I need something from you tomorrow. Someone new comes in the team, what do you bring? What gifts and qualities have you got? And what areas of weakness have you got? You know, that's a community living, so I don't think that's radical. I think it's just not being thought of.
Quick observation. There's Gilbert's book, another book in the series that actually talks about spirituality in projects. And one of their conclusions at the end is that every board should actually include someone who's representing future generations and the unborn. So they're actually arguing for a representative within a governance board who's there to represent the future. And in doing so, it's not just the planet, it's what will they need and how are we depleting it? What kind of implications will our actions today have on their generations, on the unborn who are not here at the table, but including them within the conversation, in the discussion.
And there's, we've played around with those sort of models before, and with that one, I thought, well, hold on. How do we fill that seat? And we come up with 2 easy ways. The reality is, we don't know anyone who can fit that seat. They don't know about future generations. So we leave it empty. But we address the question, and then we listen. If we don't listen to the chair, what happens is, because there's no intellectual input, you start listening to your heart. And people around the table are significantly come up with a different answer because they've got an empty chair. Another way is like everyone takes a turn every meeting sitting in that chair. So you know how it feels to be the 7th generation out. Feel, not know, because no one knows. How do you feel? Now go back to your seat and make a choice. Yeah, but
What are your thoughts on a company like Tesla? Because I guess, I could maybe not say much in this room, but out of the group, it's idolised as a company that's going places it's difficult with.
is it ethical?
No, that's it. That's what I mean, just to get your thoughts on a company like Tesla.
All I know is that Tesla are producing a fundamentally unsustainable design, which is an incremental change from the existing one, which is a 2.5-ton car that they're just putting a different motor in. Nothing radical about that. I've been trying to look for that for decades. What River Simple are doing, they designed a completely different concept of transport, which you can't buy. And so Tesla is just perpetuating the current business model. It's not radical. It's just a really ballsy guy who likes lots of things, got lots of money, and is prepared to make lots of mistakes. I'd like to see how they treat the staff. I'd like to see how they treat the communities. I'd like to see how they treat the earth as an operation. Don't judge it by its products. That's just an outcome of the thinking that created the organisation. So honestly, I don't judge them. I just have those questions. We had a thing in Bournemouth called the Green Knowledge Network, which had green companies in it. I kept saying to council, they're not green. They just produce solar power and sell low voltage bulbs. There's nothing green about those companies. They still run the same model. They're still unsustainable. They're still doing more harm with their operation. They're doing good with their products. And incidentally, most charities, as the head of a major bank told me, are doing more damage with their investments than they're doing good with their actions. Because they're investing in oil companies, in arms companies, because it's highest return. So the left hand is defeating what the right hand is doing. So when you ask that question, I think we've got to broaden it to, there may be a better model than that, but I'd say Let's ask them what's the ethos, what's the principles that they're built on? What are they prepared to sacrifice? Are they prepared to put profit before people? And then we start to judge them by their answers. Sorry, maybe there's not as well. There's no right and wrong in my world. It's just, are you helping us to get that thing, or are you hindering us? Are you taking us backwards? And to me, when I talk to people about, is that helpful? We might find that actually it is. It looked like a bad thing, but it's actually helpful. So it doesn't make people the baddies and the good guys, the unethical and the ethical. We're the ones planet. We've got to get the same point. Are we all going the same direction, or is? And each of us is, to quote, we're all sinners as well. I still drive my car. I still fly on holidays. I'm contributing to the problem as well as trying to look for solutions. It's very difficult to be, I think, to be judgmental. Like Rumi, there's a field over there beyond Whitehall. I'll leave it there.
It's difficult to take profits out of the equation, isn't it? And we've got this younger generation coming through.
It is
Can't
senseless.
afford to own their own homes. They need to be
Absolutely.
earning a salary that can support them in the
Yeah.
world that's being created. So how do you
Well,
get that balance?
if you take some profit out of it, you've created a non-sustainable organisation. What is the good of that?
So
profit
how can you
has to
then
be.
say it's about people and not profit?
No.
Because it
I'm
is
saying it's about both equally. They're both. There's no priority. If any company, any organisation doesn't make a profit, it's going to screw its staff. It can't pay them, or it's going to screw its suppliers because it can't pay them. It ends up going bankrupt, and everybody loses. Financial sustainability is the first plank you have to set down in any organisation. Only then can you start to make commitments to people. I'll pay your salary for the next 2 weeks. I'll pay you for the paper you're delivering because I've got the money. If you don't have profit, game over. That's why B Corps are so powerful, because they say if you're not a for-profit organisation, go and play another game, charity or community institute company or maybe a social enterprise. If you are for profit, we're not going to work out how we get everything together for the benefit, because you can't have an unprofitable organisation. It will die. It's the quickest route to death. So I don't know the answer to your question. What I'm saying is we've got to pose a different question. How do we say profit? The problem we've got at the moment, and it's struggling, is that some companies are literally set up to only make profit. It's the only benefit they want to create, because they're only thinking about the shareholder, which is enshrined in British law, not the stakeholders, which is not enshrined in British law. So B Corp says we will now enshrine, they use a 5 stakeholder model because they combine the environment and community in one. But the Articles of Association say the board's responsibility is to create benefit for all stakeholders without preference. That had to be a change of law to make that happen, because Companies Act 2006 precludes that. Because Companies Act 2006 was based on something that was created in 1850. So it's absolutely important to harmonise those. Absolutely important. If we don't pay our rent, we're dead. If we don't buy food, we're dead. So it's got to be a completely different way of thinking. It's not either or, it's and. I think. I might be wrong. Does that help?
It does. There's one more question.
Yeah.
You've referred to B Corp. I've never heard that term before, so could you just quickly describe what?
Benefit Corp. Briefly about the history. A bunch of guys set up a really cool ethical food company in the States many years ago, about 10 years ago. Fantastic, good growth. They got bored, as founders do. They want to go do something else, so they thought they'll sell it to the management team because they loved it and they were doing all the work. Just about to conclude the transaction, a bunch of lawyers arrived saying, if you do, we will sue you because this is an incorporated company and you are legally obliged to get the maximum return on investment to the shareholders, and we are going to outbid your management no matter what they bid. They were stuck. They had to sell it to these investors, who then just asset stripped and closed the company down. And these kids thought, never again. And they just created this concept of benefit corps, and they changed the entire legal system of the UK, of the US to accommodate that. I think there's 10,000 companies in the US, and now there's 1,000 in Britain. B-Lab UK is the charity that supports and promotes them here, and we've been working with them to promote this as a business model. And it's enshrined. They have to do good for the society, have to do good for the environment, and they have to make a profit. And believe me, these kids that run these organisations, it's mainly kids who are starting, they haven't got a clue how to do it. But they're going to. And they need people like us to help them. They need our wisdom, they need our experience, all our failures, to help them find out how to do it. So BLab UK is inspiring because although they are paid by every time they sign up a B Corp, their goal is to create a community that learns. So they've got about 1,000 companies, but they've got about 10,000 people. Most of those people will never become B Corps, but they'll just become a little bit closer. And it's collaborative, so they help each other. So it's a truly amazing organisation, and it may go out of business, but we need to promote and support them. So it's BLab UK. Google that website and find them. And I think it's against the radical thinking. Young kids coming in, no business acumen, went down the wrong path, backed out of it, and went down the path they wanted to. At probably extreme personal cost to themselves. So I find it really inspiring.
Yeah, I think your notion of delivering benefit to all the stakeholders without preference is one of the most powerful things.
How do you deal with conflict in this model? How do you deal with conflict between different stakeholders?
You encourage it. You encourage it. There's got to be conflict. Interesting point. There's 6 stakeholders, right? This first board that was set up, the stewards. The stewards, by the way, monitor these guys. They decided they'd have 5 board members here, and they'd be elected by those 6 individuals. Sounds simple, doesn't it? If it was 6 and 6, it'd be easy. Oh, I'm an environmentalist, I want planet, I get a green consultant, I'm a financer. But there's only going to be 5 seats on that board, and all 6 people have to agree. So, with a capital D, the only mechanism they could think of working was dialogue. They'd have to get these people in dialogue with each other so that they resolved their differences and came up with consensus about who was going on that. And I was asked to recruit a chairman for that, and a finance director. And the invitation we put out was, this is the board we want. These are the qualities in the board. It's got yin and yang, it's got masculine and feminine, it's got competition, etc. It's all balanced by another force. All good, unless they are out of balance. And we just said to people, what qualities are you going to bring to this board if you join? And second question, who will you become in 5 years if you've been on this board? Because no one's done what they've done. There's no point asking what they've done before, because nothing they've done before has got any bearing on trying to create that model. And the people we got were phenomenal. But they said, this is the quality I will bring, not qualifications or experience. And we had a rule, it had to be, the new board had to be either 40% male and at the same time 40% female, so that we'd embrace the feminine and masculine. And we ended up with that. Because we found people in combination think, yeah, I wouldn't recruit either of them, but I would recruit both of them, which is a very strange situation to be in recruitment. 2 people, yeah, we'll recruit both of you, but only if both of you say yes. One says no, sorry, the deal's off. And we didn't use headhunters, because headhunters have no idea about sustainability. So it's, I don't know if that answers your question a little bit. Yeah, but it's about really getting back to what we're trying to do. So the conflict has always got to be there, because the last thing we want to do is say, oh, okay, you win, I won't represent my party. No, I'm going to represent my party because that's what I'm here for, that's what I believe in. And we're going to have to work with that. I mean, we do it at home every day with our kids, with our husbands, with our wives, with our partners. And any relationship that gets out of balance for a time, starts to become dysfunctional. Some of that balance has got to be returned. So it's actually learning from nature. Things have to be in balance and harmony. They can go out, but they're going to come back. And how do you build that into an organisation? Don't know. Certainly won't start if you don't start set out as well. So the conflict's good. The Body Shop, Simon Hensel Thomas, who someone we know was the values manager, and it was fascinating talking to him. He used to go into the business group. But if you go, has anyone been in the Body Shop buildings? They've still got Anita Roddick's 5 principles how they come. By the way, Anita Roddick basically gave over her goals to ASB to because they got deep attachment, never met herself. Those 5 principles are still there 20, 30 years after. They represent the long-term survivability of the company. That's what it's all about. Go to any manager, product designer, sales guy, etc. Well, they're there to meet their quota next month. They're there to get the products out, the invoices out, the staff hire, etc. All short term. So Simon's role, he said, my role is to create and hold conflict. So if you're the product designer, I'm going to say, yeah, you need palm oil, don't you? Yeah, well, it's going to be sustainable. What? No, I guess that's much cheaper. Yeah, but if you do, one of the principles that this long-term survivability of the company will be weakened. So you put the short term ahead of the long term. But if you take my advice and go and get 100% sustainable oil, you're probably not going to make a profit. So what do? You sit around the table and dialogue, and you try and work out a system that's a win-win, that the short term and the long term win. And that happened most of the time. And then Simon would do the most important thing. He'd just give the guy his business model. No one would view that Simon had been involved, because you're the manager responsible. You get all the glory, bringing a sustainable solution to it. So there's a lot of humility in there. So the conflict's good. We must have conflict. It must be managed, and it mustn't allow a dominant position. Or if it is, maybe you win today, I win tomorrow, but that's an agreement we have, because you can't always have a win-win. The true model you have is a win-win-win. You win, I win, but that could be collusion. That could be a conspiracy. That could be Swiss. No Swiss in the room. They have cartels. The third win is everybody else wins. And that's what Simon and Elizabeth, his boss, will strive all the time. Win, win, win. And you can make judgments as to how well Body Shop's doing in that school now, but it's a struggle. That's what business is.
Any other questions or thoughts? Well, thank you, Gwen, for a very thought-provoking session, which you promised and have delivered on. So, can we thank Gwen? Now, it's 5-1. Do you want to do your piece
I
now?
can do one quickly. I don't have to do half an hour because I'm reading about that. Yeah, well, you just want to just keep an eye out for the food and make signals. I think that's is that just the drinks or the food and drinks? Is it? I don't want to be the person standing between lunch and that doesn't end well. I might get it. But I will pay threshold. That's fine. Okay. Right. So no pressure. I can't confirm or deny that the food is available. Right, where's my stuff? Let me find my slides. Did I email them to myself? I think I did. Blah 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 blah. Ah, here's my slides. All right, so I've got 35 slides. You're definitely not going to see all of them in the time that we have available. I'm Nigel Williams. I work for Agency along with Karen. That's our RPM logo created yesterday at 2 p.m., no? Always good to pull back the curtain to reduce the mystery. Yes, I like it. You know.
He's working.
Well, because a lot of hours weren't spent on it, it was kind of sustainable, so nothing was missing. So, lecture and project management, I work with Karen on 2 RPM projects that we have, this one's on competencies, next one's responsible project management in Bangladesh. Background, I started as a project manager myself in a steel mill, which is really unsustainable, if you want to put it in that perspective. And then moved on to become a consultant and then academia and so on. So I understand the constraints that you're under, Jackie, quite well, because we had a sustainability manager who was in a tiny office far, far away from operations and couldn't come to a number of meetings. Once they showed up, meeting was over. Nobody would talk to the sustainability person. It wasn't good to be seen with them, bad for your career. So we understand that completely. What's that?
It's not quite that bad here.
Yeah, well, that's in some companies. But this, when we talk about responsible project management, sustainability, and so on, we're really having a discussion about power and influence. We talk a lot about terms, and we throw around the things that we should do and shouldn't do and so on. But that implies a decision-making process about who gets to do what and who gets to be what, and what is good and what is bad. So we're really having a discussion about power, which is why these things are so disruptive. That's why you get a lot of resistance. Because if it was all just a good thing that everybody should do, there'd be no resistance, right? So you'd have a beauty contest and everybody say they want world peace. That sounds good. How do we get there? That implies a radical restructuring of political relationships and economic relationships. That is simply not going to happen in the short term. It's a big power disruption. So we have to think of sustainability as that. That's not all.
Yeah, she's going to do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There are lots of students in here who might steal it, but we'll get it out another time. Good to put it inside. Right. So my specific task was to kind of look at what is the knowledge discourse around sustainability and project management. And I looked at it using 3 or 4 different lenses. So this is a really simplified model. I'm sure much sophisticated ones exist. So you got your project teams at the core, and you have all these things that feed us sort of information. We have NGOs who try to push the discourse in one particular direction, mostly by influencing policy. We've got media institutions. With project management, since the profession isn't at a high level of development, the level of influence of the professional association, industry association on us isn't as high as in medicine or in accounting, because you can't say somebody is not a project manager. If you look for project management jobs, there's a wide range of things that we consider a project manager job, from customer engagement to events to finance. So it's difficult to draw defined boundaries in the profession, and if you can't erect a moat to keep people out, you have very little power to tell them what they can and can't do. Again, this discussion is about power. So, like 3 stances of sustainability that I adopted from these people. There's sustainability is integration, and we talk a lot about that in this room, bringing people together, conflict, managing interactions, and so on. There is still a view that sustainability is a limit. So there's things that we can't do because we can't afford it. Or we can be this amount of sustainability and not more. And then there's sustainability as transformation, where it's more of an existential approach, where we reject these false dichotomies and we'll make a new world. Which, again, the real world is kind of a mix of all 3 of these things. So if I were to update my diagram there, we have, a lot of people in green saying we bring people together, harmonize, balance, win-win. We have business lobby groups who, depending on where they are in the political spectrum, might maintain that sustainability is a limit and we can't afford that. Let's have a bonfire of the regulations. Don't know how you do that. I guess you have to print them out first before you bring them because they're PDFs. But it's hard work to do that. And then we have NGOs who are trying to push the conversation in a different way, saying that we really do have to transform what we're doing. One point I wanted to add to this is that our connections aren't direct. Increasingly, they're being mediated because there's more knowledge being generated that anybody can possibly read. And knowledge, by that I mean data, really. Documents, academic papers, white papers, videos, and so on. And increasingly, what we're seeing is being mediated by algorithms. So we, in terms of your social media feeds, nobody's going to read all that stuff. You see a headline, click and move on. And what you get to see is mediated by somebody else. So somebody has power over what it is you can and can't see. It's the same thing with academia. We have relatively simple algorithms in the form of a list of journals that we should publish in and shouldn't publish in. So there's ref analysis and so on. But if you go to specific platforms like Elsevier or Scopus and so on, they have their own organizing frameworks that shape what it is you can and can't see. So if you know you're looking for somebody specific, you can see that information. If you're just browsing around in the early stages of your research, you're going to be falling down a rabbit hole of academic papers that you have limited control. So that's and then of course you're competing with cat videos, who are also mediated by algorithms, which categories you get to see and that sort of stuff. So we have all these mediators. They also suggest an opportunity for us to reframe conversations because we don't necessarily have to target the core providers themselves. We can try to make shifts to these mediators, these algorithms, to help change conversations. So you don't necessarily have to change all of the discourse. You could change how the discourse is being framed and who does the framing. So there is an opportunity there for us to sort of recontextualize project management. So that's the less boring part. This is the boring part. So we did a scoping review of existing management research because generally in project management presentations, PM people tend to talk to other PM people and we're a very small community. So we have a limited range of knowledge to draw upon, 4 ranked journals, 12 not so good and so on. So we what I did is I looked at abstracts from general business and management research the last 5 years, about 4,000 abstracts. We did some topic modeling, machine learning, sorry Gilbert, that we took those 4,000 abstracts and turned them into topics using a LD algorithm. You can watch that on your own by yourself when you have time. And I borrowed Sylvius's categorical scheme or categorization scheme, topic modeling, compare teams, right? So these are Sylvius's 5 themes. I don't know if he's in the room. Well, 6. You'll see the 6th one soon. Align economic interests, short-term and long-term, orientation, preserve natural capital, accept responsibility. I think all the previous presentations sort of mentioned that in some form or fashion. When we look at what management research talks about, it's a much broader conversation. 40 topics we won't go into to do is, let's just look at the ones that are sort of covered by or projects that are covered in business and management journals, and some of them are, innovation, economic value added, some of these areas. What's slightly more interesting is what hasn't been covered in project management journals so far, or in project management research. So these are things that we haven't looked at in any form or fashion, like sustainable business models, for example. We talk about projects as an entity in itself. From other perspectives, projects are simply a context in which companies and organizations and business models exist. So while from the project management perspective, projects are really, really important to us, from the accounting perspective, it doesn't really matter. So sustainable business models is something that we don't talk about, we can start thinking about. Tensions and conflicts, Gwen raised that, it's something we don't talk too much about in sustainability and project management. Future, and you'll see this theme come up again. We don't look at envisioning the future. Again, that ties into the whole framing of projects being a tool to do a task. So, you don't ask your hammer about the future, why would you ask a project manager? So that ties in very, very nicely to that we don't contemplate what are the long-term consequences of what we do today. Drivers and barriers and process improvement. So that's a short one. Similar thing, I looked at ethics separately because trying to model both of them using the machine learning algorithm was a bad idea. So I looked at ethics simply because of the algorithm. That's sustainability is also about ethics. That's what's covered in Business and Management Journal. Again, not particularly interesting. These are some areas that we could sort of explore that are in red, that we haven't looked at so far in existing project management research. Things like crisis management, national culture, because we all are speaking from a sort of a normative approach. When we talk about ethics in this room so far, that these are things you should do, but different cultures have different views on these things. And we can't necessarily assume that our way is the way that everything should be done. And that area has been explored to an extent in business and management research. And it's something we have to start looking at in project management because, of course, most projects tend to cross national culture boundaries. Impact on employee task performance. That, ethical businesses, employees tend to be happier and do better. That's a consensus so far. But we might actually find some negative examples. I don't know. Leadership styles and teaching and learning, something we don't do much of. Just a few papers recently, but it's a very big area in management ethics research. We can look at how do you develop ethical business managers. All right, so yeah, I'll slow this one down. So sustainability competencies, Again, I'm kind of rushing through this, but I think I sent these slides before, so this should be fine. Again, adopted from this guy called Sylvius. I don't know, you know, he's around somewhere. I follow this framework.
No, the framework was by week.
Yeah, but you kind of adapted it, and I stole it. No, I'll get it back. Sure. So systems thinking, anticipatory competencies. You know, looking ahead. Oh, Sylvius already said that, so I don't just say that again. He said it better too. Project management research. If you look at competencies, you get a lot of boring stuff. You know, these are these tables were much bigger, but I took out all the boring things like managing Gantt charts and that sort of stuff, and scope and talking to stakeholders. Everybody knows that. These are all the way things are extracted from these multiple researchers. Interdependencies, emotions, trust. So, you know, researchers are beginning to incorporate these ideas, or we're always incorporating these ideas into their competency research. These are what project managers should do or could do or would do, maybe. Or these will make good project managers. So, you know, keep going along the list, blah, 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 blah. Where the gap is, and again, that's kind of in red, we don't really talk about the future. So that whole idea of anticipatory competencies, looking ahead, what comes next. Project management, research, and researchers. And we are under less constraints than managers because we get to choose our problems. And we still don't look at anticipatory competencies. We still don't look at the future. And we have the luxury of being able to say, well, okay, I can get a grant and study this, and there's no real curriculum requirement. So, blind spot there. And last and definitely least, so, you know, these are some things we could cover. Last thing I looked at was when I talked about the framing mechanisms back in the beginning, I thought, well, okay, one of the ways in which we would express demand for sustainability competencies is in the people that we would recruit. Because if you're looking at bringing in sustainable project managers, you've got to hire them, right? So you have to advertise for jobs that recruit sustainable project managers. That'll be logical. Arab can't just sit quietly and think, well, we want sustainable project managers and do absolutely nothing about it. And sustainable project managers will emerge or appear. So they've got to look for them. So I looked at job ads for project managers, scraped it up of Monster.com, looked at 3,000-4,000 job ads to see, well, okay, where were these competencies covered? And what we find mostly are the usual boring things and a couple new things emerging for program managers, strategic interpersonal competencies. But a lot of the other areas that have been addressed even in research or identified as being important, even in Rob's discussion, job ads aren't looking for them. Again, that suggested another relatively simple intervention. If you want to get these project managers in, you start advertising for them, or you lobby people like Monster or AV to include fields for sustainability. That we should start putting that in as a requirement or a competency of advertising for. So the point is that, you know, we're not looking for these people, so we're not going to find them. And that's that. Really quick, because I was separating you on lunch.
What I think we should probably do is print off some of those and put them. Well, because give people a chance after later on we're going to be using open space technology to have discussions. So people need to have a look at what the landscape looks like, and then they can select the areas they want to discuss.
No problem. So I'll just print off the stuff with the red slides.
Everybody else, but I'm feeling a bit punchline at the minute.
Yeah,
so
of course.
We can get some of this printed off and spread it around the room. And after lunch, we'll use these desks we've got on the machines to organise ourselves into groups in a very flexible way. And again, I'm drawing heavily on Green's work, where I first encountered open space technology. But basically, the rule is about you vote with your feet. You are responsible for your own learning, and you stay with the conversation as long as it's useful to you. You are contributing, and then you move on. So I'll explain all that after lunch when we get to that point. But if we print out some of those tables, yeah, exactly. We'll print out some of the tables so that you can digest it in perhaps a more leisurely fashion, because I'm aware Nigel was under a lot of pressure then to deliver because he was standing between us and lunch, so there's an hour gone. So, pause for a breather. And I know Gwyn has to leave us very sadly. It would be lovely to have him here for the rest of the session. But he's sort of going on not exactly a real job, but a job. It's totally alive.
Thanks to you.
As always, fantastic.
I didn't see all these. It's now really 5-6 years ago, which are getting into. The problem we have is we don't use any recruitment consultants.
I think most of the
Yeah, looks like it. You've got to start where and you find that you get better. What we did was get ourselves started to give headhunters, particularly, the access to sustainability. And you would read the job spec and say, no, that's not what the company needs. They don't know what they actually need is this, and we're going to find someone who's got that quality. They end up putting a building manager in charge of the ethics department. And that's seeding. Yeah. But you know, yeah, but it's got to be a small investment. So I can't have the time to do all that. We teach the or you yeah. If you put something up on conscious thinking, you will attract very different people. They're saying what you want, you don't need to know what you really need it, but it's imitation. Oh no, I've got it.
you got it all.
Yeah. I lose too many. Did I help with your question?
Yes, I mean, it's really yes, basically, yeah. Because I knew you'd been doing yeah.
Well, we don't want is it 1 month or is it? It doesn't matter. No, if they were tracking numbers.
All we can see is I think that's it's called vegetarian sauce.
So that's what we look for. It's just yeah, sure.
Your detailed ones, though, especially the work.
Yeah, the team is currently cultural treatment, so it's just.
Yeah.
I think it's an hour.
They were paying more.
Just a look. Yes, 2 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, just.
That's one of the benefits of being a consultant. You're an industry, you can't just go and work in construction. That's it.
In the later stages.
I guess it's something to look at.
A couple of banks, smaller banks, who really position themselves in bonds in those
That's going to just see what
I know that more.
yeah, they've been.
I can be more honest and no problem. Definitely not. And some of the examples I thought I didn't want. Oh yes, certainly not. So I'll just stop this here.